What if I told you one of the richest civilizations in human history operated for thousands of years, without banks, no ATMs, no loans with interest, no stock markets, no credit cards? Yet ancient Egypt built monuments so massive they still defy explanation. They fed millions, they paid workers. They funded wars, temples, and a god-king state that lasted longer than almost any empire in history. So here's the mystery. How did ancient Egypt manage wealth, control resources, and prevent financial chaos without banks? And more importantly, why did this system eventually break down anyway? The answer reveals a financial model radically different from ours, yet disturbingly familiar. To understand Egypt's system, we have to erase modern assumptions. There was no coined money for most of Egyptian history. No paper currency, no private banks moving capital around. Instead, wealth flowed through control, accounting, and storage. At the center of everything stood three institutions: the pharaoh, the temples, and the state granaries. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was a living god. And in Egypt, divine authority meant total economic authority. All land technically belonged to the crown. Farmers didn't own land in the modern sense. They worked it in exchange for protection, stability, and survival. But here's the twist. Egypt didn't run on gold. It ran on grain. The Nile River flooded every year, depositing fertile silt. This made Egypt incredibly productive. But agricultural abundance created a problem. How do you store, measure, and redistribute wealth without money? Egypt's answer was simple and revolutionary. They turned grain into unit of account wealth. Grain was measurable, storable, essential for survival, and controlled by the state. Taxes were paid in grain. Workers were paid in grain. Temples were funded in grain. Even debts were recorded in grain equivalents. Massive state granaries acted like central banks, storing surplus during good years and redistributing it during bad ones. Scribes tracked everything. Every sack of wheat was counted, recorded, and audited. In a world without interest rates, accounting was power. This system scaled. Malcolm-scaled temple complexes became economic hubs. They owned land, employed workers, ran workshops, and controlled trade networks. The priesthood functioned like financial administrators. Laborers who built the pyramids weren't slaves. They were paid in rations, bread, beer, onions, and clothing. Payment wasn't optional. It was contractual and recorded, because wealth flowed through centralized control rather than private accumulation. Egypt avoided some problems modern economies face. No speculative bubbles, no bank runs, no private debt crises for centuries. This system created stability. Egypt didn't just survive, thrived, but stability came with a cost. The system depended on three things: strong central authority, predictable Nile floods, honest administration. When any of these failed, the system cracked. Climate disruptions led to poor harvests. Less grain meant less tax revenue. Less revenue meant unpaid workers. We have surviving texts like the Deir el-Medina strikes where workers stopped working because the state failed to pay rations. Corruption spread. Local officials skimmed grain. Records were falsified. Temples hoarded resources instead of redistributing them. Without private banks to absorb shocks or diversify risk, everything fell on the state. And when the state weakened, the economy collapsed with it. Here's the shocking part. Even without money, Egypt experienced inflation. As grain became scarce, wages failed to keep up. Ration sizes shrank. Prices and barter transactions rose. Confidence in the system declined. Later, when coinage finally entered Egypt under Greek and Roman rule, it didn't fix the problem, accelerated inequality. Wealth concentrated in private hands. Temples lost power. State control weakened further. The old system couldn't adapt. Failed fixes, more control, less trust. Egypt tried tightening oversight. More audits, more decrees, harsher punishments. But control without trust doesn't restore stability. By the late periods, Egypt became dependent on foreign rulers, foreign currencies, and foreign financial systems. The world's longest-lasting economic model quietly faded. Here's why this matters today. Modern economies also rely on centralized institutions. Central banks don't store grain, but they store liquidity. Digital numbers replace sacks of wheat. When supply chains fail, inflation rises. When trust breaks, systems freeze. When record keepers lose credibility, collapse follows. Ancient Egypt shows us something unsettling. You don't need banks to have financial power, but you do need legitimacy, transparency, and resilience. Lose those and no system survives. First, wealth is not money. It's control over resources. Second, accounting systems are as powerful as armies. Third, centralization creates stability, creates fragility. Egypt mastered wealth without banks, but no system escapes entropy. The question isn't whether our financial systems will change. It's how gracefully or violently that change happens. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If this story changed how you think about money, power, and control, like the video, subscribe. And join us as we uncover the hidden financial engines behind the rise and fall of civilizations. Because the future always leaves clues in the past.